This is a 90s handheld video game console that nobody's ever heard of, and yet it had the potential to be a serious competitor to the Game Boy. It's a TigerGame.com, and I actually bought one of these at Toys R Us when it came out in 1997.
Game.com! Lay those bloodshot eyes on these babies! Its speed begs to be touched!
That was an era when Tiger was known for cheap electronic games, like this horrible Aladdin example from 1990 that I thought was boring even when I was a toddler. When it was first announced, the Game.com generated a fair amount of buzz thanks to a handful of pretty nifty features. The most exciting of those was the display, which is a touchscreen. Those weren't common at the time, even in expensive devices, so it was a big deal. The display was also relatively high resolution with 200 by 160 pixels. Compare that to the Game Boy's 160 by 144. On top of that, it had dual cartridge slots, serial connectivity, a seemingly powerful 10 megahertz Sharp CPU, pretty decent sound hardware, and a reasonable price of $69.95, which is equal to about $140 today. This was marketed as a kind of Game Boy for adults, and Tiger really wanted to push its multitasking and online capabilities, which is where the Game.com name came from. By the way, that was supposed to be pronounced just as Gamecom, but nobody did that. It was a bit like a PDA, but with gaming capabilities and internet connectivity. To get online, you would need a special internet cartridge and a dial-up modem. Then, in theory, you could do very basic tasks like sending email and browsing a text-only version of the web. But the TigerGame.com was a massive flop, ultimately selling fewer than 300,000 units. The reasons for its failure include poor marketing, an extremely limited game catalog, and somewhat ironically, a really terrible screen. That highly touted touchscreen turned out to be a complete disaster. The unit I'm showing here has a faulty screen, which is common for these today, but they weren't much better when new. The refresh rate was abysmal, and even with contrast adjustment, it was difficult to see. There wasn't any backlight, and the resistive touch panel only had a 12 by 10 grid, so it wasn't exactly sensitive. But the biggest problem was the game selection, which was a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. Nobody bought the thing, so developers didn't make games, and so nobody bought the thing. By the time the Game.com was discontinued in 2000, only 20 games had been released. Most of those were developed by Tiger themselves and were ports of existing titles that ran poorly on this hardware. Another 20 or so games were announced but were never released. When Nintendo released the Game Boy Color in 1998,
Game Boy Color.
Get into it.
Get into it.
just a little over a year after the Game.com hit shelves, the fate of Tiger's little experiment was sealed. Around that time, I sold my Game.com to a pawn shop for $20, and I'm pretty sure I only got that because the guy working the counter felt sorry for 10-year-old me. Now, almost 3 decades later, the world has forgotten the TigerGame.com. It doesn't have its own cult following like the Atari Lynx, Sega Game Gear, and Neo Geo Pocket. It doesn't have any exclusive games that people are clamoring to play, and it isn't very collectible. But it is an interesting part of gaming history and shows that at one point in time, Tiger had the potential to go up against Nintendo.